Let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. This is a very interesting presentation with a lot of in-depth background and information and experience. And the title is How Attorneys Lose on Average 50,000, or let's say at least 50% of the disc injury award when not including these 10 major categories in the demand ladder. We're going to show you very specifically how the disc injury is routinely being accepted for 50% less than what it should be accepted. And I'm going to show you many examples and how it all comes together in great detail. So here's how it's going to, here's all the topics we're going to be covering. And we're going to kind of go big funnel to small funnel, and we're going to put it all together in great detail by the time we finish. And you'll see exactly what we're talking about. So before we get started, just to let you know that this is the Car Injury Doctor Network. And what it is I'm Dr. Holleran with the Car Injury Doctor Network. And what we do, it's doctors that are specifically trained in personal injury, specifically car accident injuries, with what's called high sensitivity, high relevancy documentation that actually finds and documents, and then actually put that information in a logical sequential format in a narrative report, deposition, or trial testimony. This is the exact documentation that I used to never lose a case in court. And we're going to show you how it actually stops bad faith, what I call bad faith lowball offers. Bad faith lowball. When I say bad faith lowball offers, what am I talking about? I'm not saying that every injury should be a policy limit award. That's not at all what we're talking about. When I talk about bad faith lowball offers, I'm going to talk about when insurance companies don't want to pay the medicals. They don't want to pay the need for future care. You know, they just try to get out of so many different categories that are just bad faith. And so this documentation, it's real solid. So if the patient has it, then we put it in a logical sequential order. And if they don't have it, they don't have it. But what we will be able to see is exactly what we do or don't have and how that'll translate into the potential injury award. It'll actually show the strength of the case. And one of the things that I always say is, one of the reasons I never lost in case using this documentation is because I knew when not to go to court. That's just as important. So one of the major things we're going to be covering tonight is knowing what documentation we actually do or don't have, and how strong is that documentation, and how does it relate to the strength of the case or the strength of the injury award. And this is from the medical perspective. So again, I'm Dr. Paul. So I've had 30 plus experience. I've opened 77 offices in 20 states, past speaker in 3 chiropractic colleges. And again, I've never lost a case in court using this documentation. And this is what we teach. So we teach continuing education to chiropractors and attorneys with personal injury across the United States, giving these presentations. So we've been doing this for 30 years. So we know exactly what works, what doesn't work, how it works. But I'll also share with you this. I'll share with you what's not getting done by the doctors. And there's actually 2 problems, and that's 95% of the problem. That's 95% of the problem. 5%, which is a real small part of the problem, is when the attorney actually gets good, strong documentation to actually go for the injury award and not just cave, to be honest with you. I found that to be very rare, though. Most attorneys I found, when they have good, solid documentation, well-rounded, that covers all these categories, that they don't cave. They actually demand, and we're actually going to go into the formulas that not only qualify something, what we call good, strong case, but then how is that transferred into the formulas of injury awards. So to know what to ask, because that one thing is knowing how strong of a case you have. The next thing is well, how much should we ask? Those are 2 big questions. Well, we're going to cover those tonight. We're going to go in great detail, as a matter of fact. So having said that, this and how all this started really was a case that I had. It was a patient who was in an auto accident, went to the emergency room. They said nothing was wrong. She kept having problems in her low back. Went back to her general practitioner. They said there was nothing wrong. And Finally, she went to the attorney because the insurance company kept jerking her around and not paying her bills and giving her a hard time. And so the attorney actually saw this presentation. So he referred her over. We documented what was not documented by the doctors. And of course, that was the majority of the problem. That's 95% of the problem, by the way, is the documentation that's being missed by the doctors. And we documented it. I showed the attorney, I said, this is what you have, this is what you don't have. I said, you actually have a real strong case. So it went from 0 to $110,000 policy limit award is what that particular case went to. And that case was with no disc injury. It didn't have a fracture or disc injury or mild concussion. It was a soft tissue spinal injury. Now, specifically what we're going to be talking about tonight is the disc injury, okay? So we'll pay a lot of attention to the disc. And we're going to talk about the general disc injury. I'm not going to get into variables. You know, there's all kinds of residuals you could or couldn't have. We're just going to drive home the key points, the key documentation points relative to the standard run-of-the-mill disc bulge, disc herniation from trauma, from a personal injury, okay? That's where the focus of this on. And so there's variables that can play into it, but this is like the standard, okay? So let's go into, again, how and why, and this is what I've personally seen and experienced, that attorneys are losing easily 50% of the potential injury award, and they're not even aware of it. And I'm going to show you exactly how and why that's happening. Then I'm going to show you exactly how to stop it. And more importantly, we'll show you exactly the documentation that you should be getting with these cases that you're not aware of. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So we're going to go into several categories. Let me go to the outline of the categories, and then we're going to walk through one at a time. And we're just going to, like I said, we're going to talk big funnel first, and then we're just going to start getting it tighter and tighter and tighter, where it all makes sense at the end. We go, yeah, we can see how the injury award can easily be twice that or stop losing 50%. We just need to be more knowledgeable about what we're doing here. So the first category we're going to do is we're going to look at the potential loss. We're going to look at the potential gain that you can incur or the potential loss. Either way, that can result, that you can change as a result of this information. So on the very first sheet we have here, if you could fill out just the basic information if you haven't done it yet, your name and phone number and email. But the number one question is, how many disc injury cases do you get a month? That's the number one question. Now, when I say disc injury, I'm basically talking about a confirmed disc bulge, disc herniation with an MRI. That's what I'm talking about. So that's the definition we're going to, and we're going to say no residuals. That's it, okay? So how many disc injury cases do you get a month? That's where we want to start, all right? Now, from there, let me go through the outline, and then let's go ahead and come back and get started. From there, we're going to go into the 4 potential injury awards. From there, we're going to go, okay, what documentation is needed, missed, not done, and how important is that documentation relative to the injury award? Then we're going to go into the 7 minimum categories of documentation necessary to support a high-value injury award and stop a low-ball offer. This one, we'll spend a little bit of time on that, because this is what's going to determine the strength of the case. How are we? In other words, when I talked to my attorney, I literally handed him this sheet. And in other words, this was the case we had. We did all the documentation, and I showed him the sheet, and I said, this is what you have. These are the categories of documentation, and I call it horizontal and vertical documentation, and you'll see it here in just a second. Oh, this is what you do have. This is what you do not have. And based on this, this is the strength of the case, which takes you to the next question is, well, what should you ask for? Well, then we're going to go into that. We're going to go to the injury formulas of how to support what you're asking for based on the doctor's documentation. We're going to go into the categories that what are called the high sensitivity, high relevancy documentation categories. that you are or are not getting, and this is absolutely what will determine the value of the case, period. We're going to go into those in great detail and show what's being done right and what's being missed commonly. And then from there, we're going to go into, and I'll share with you what you should be getting. We're going to look at just a standard disc injury, and I'll go through each of the categories, and I'll share with you, generally speaking, what you should be getting with your documentation. And I'll just tell you right now, 50% of it, you're already not. I've already done this plenty of times, that about 50% of the documentation in these personal injury cases are not being done by the doctors, and the attorneys don't even know it. And that's what's limiting the injury award. And so what's happening, and I see this everywhere, is the doctors are not being trained, because we're not trained in chiropractic school or medical school in high sensitivity, high relevancy documentation with personal injuries. So, and that's special training. And one of the ways that I try to point this out when I talk with attorneys, I oftentimes when we'll do seminars, I'll say, how much attorneys did you learn personal injury in law school? And I usually get a laugh. Usually it's like, you're joking, right? Well, guess what? That's exactly the scenario with chiropractors and how much personal injury they're being taught in chiropractic college, or medical doctors and how much personal injury they're being taught. So what's happening is the doctors are not learning the high sensitivity, high relevancy documentation. They're missing up to 50% of the documentation. They don't even know it. They're in a state of unconscious competence. They give it to the attorney. The attorney thinks he knows what he's doing just because he's a licensed doctor. And then there's not much of an injury award offer, because there's no documentation to support it, although there could be in the majority of these cases. And then, so what's the attorney have to do now? Has to ask everybody to cut their bill. And now the doctors get mad. And the person who started the whole problem in the first place was the doctor's lack of knowledge and skill in documenting high sensitivity and high relevancy documentation and putting it together. And so typically there's less than a 2-to-1 injury award with a high medical bill. That's what's going on. And it's crazy. Then the attorneys don't know it. The chiropractors and the doctors, they don't know it. And because they're in a state of unconscious incompetence, we only know what we know. That's it. Until they start taking courses like what I give or other specialists give, and they go, wow, I had no idea that there was this much more to documenting a personal injury case. That's what happens. Okay, so having said that, that's what we're going to be going through. So it's going to be, and then we'll end up into, once we have all the documentation, then we'll go, okay, here's what we do or don't have, or what you should have, and go, well, let's now take that information and convert it into the injury award. That's what we're going to be doing. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we already said fill out the first page with how many disc injury cases you have a month. Let's go to the second category now, that the doctor's documentation is essentially responsible for up to 97% of the injury award, and there's 4 potential injury awards. Now, each state is slightly different, but generally speaking, these are the 4 main categories from the doctor's perspective and the doctor's documentation. Number 1, medicals. Number 2, the impairment injury award. Number 3, pain and suffering injury award. And number 4, the prognosis and need for future care injury award. So we're going to come back after we go through the documentation and fill the charts up, and we're going to go in and interpret this and show how this documentation leads to this injury award, or if you don't have it, essentially you're going to be losing out on 50% potential of the injury award. And that's the most common scenario that's happening right now, that most attorneys don't know and most of the doctors don't know, because they don't know what they don't know. So we'll go to the next page here, which is, we start with the documentation. Well, there's about 30 plus, around 32 different documentation categories. Got them written down here. You've got the list. I'm not going to go into all of them in detail. But there's three major categories we're going to pay attention to. Obviously, there's the subjective evidence. There's what's called the hybrid evidence. Now, this gets to be real important. And a lot of times when I talk to doctors or attorneys, they've never heard of this before. They've heard of subjective or objective. Hybrid evidence is a combination of the patient's actions or reactions and the doctor's interpretation. Now, this gets to be really important, especially if these tests are dependent on the art of being a doctor. That's why you can have different outcomes with hybrid tests, because it's the doctor that's in their experience, the art of being the doctor. Then there's the objective evidence. And by the way, the other reason this is important, it's another category that helps us substantiate the injury award. That's why this is a major category for the injury award. And then, of course, the last category is the objective evidence. And I'll just share with you right now, there's a lot more objective evidence that could be documented that's not routinely. And we're going to go in and I'm going to show you exactly what it is and what it should be. And of course, that's the most important when we look at, the categories of evidence. Obviously, the objective, which is totally independent of the patient and the doctor. So that's the most trustworthy information. So that's very, very valuable to know these categories, especially. So we have to have doctors that know how to document all these categories. This is called high sensitivity, high relevancy documentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the 7 minimum categories. Now, this is very specific because this is the 7 minimum categories of documentation that basically determines the strength of the case. So let's walk through these categories. Now, there can be more, but these are the bare minimum. In other words, that's like when I talk to my attorneys, this is the bare bones where we start. We go, well, where's the starting point? Is this a good case to start from? Or is this not even a good case to start from? So that's obviously where we need to start.